Hi, all. Thank you for joining us for the Elevate Finance Summit, virtual summit nowadays. Just some housekeeping on the screen. I'm not going to go through this, but just to make sure you have a good experience, please read through these items over the next few seconds. I'll wait a few more minutes for other folks to join in, and then we'll kick right in. Great. Hopefully everyone has been able to get on, have been able to just kind of check off all the things in the housekeeping to make sure you have a good experience, and we will get going without further ado. So typically we run these virtual Elevate Finance Summits essentially every month or so. We were doing them in person, of course, at different areas of the country, usually about 10 cities per year. But obviously with coronavirus and the situation, we have moved to a virtual summit. Typically, those formats are customers. We usually have several customers on each of these virtual finance summits, and we interview them and get their feedback on how they're running their finance and scaling their team and dealing and adapting with their business challenges. However, given the situation, given the complexity all of you on the phone are dealing with, given the coronavirus and given with work from home, given concerns around cost, funding, and other challenges in your business, we thought we should mix it up a little bit. And so we're proud and pleased that we were able to get Dick Costolo from O1 Advisors, the VC firm, to join us. Of course, as you know, he was the CEO of Twitter for 5 years, as well as COO beforehand, and then CEO, founder, COO of many other companies before. So he's got a breadth of experience, a breadth of insight and wisdom he can share with you folks. I will jump right in without further ado. So I talked a little bit about what the Elevate Finance Summit generally is about, and some of you may have attended those in the past. But this time we're going to shift gears a little bit and focus a lot on, what COVID-19 is forcing companies to change, how they're thinking differently, how they're navigating all of the turbulence out there. And essentially it'll be a panel questionnaire. I'll ask Dick a number of different questions. He'll provide his feedback. Once that'll be about 35 minutes, I'll jump in with a few slides about Topology, so that if you're not familiar already, you can get a little bit more familiar with what we do and whether it might help your business. And then we'll go to question and answers. And a number of you have already responded with questions, which is great. And so almost all of those are for Dick, which is excellent. And so I'll run through as many as I can throughout the length of the webinar. After the webinar, of course, we will send an email within a few days with the recording as well, so you can share with your peers and buddies. So without further ado, Dick Costolo, I will introduce shortly, but as you know, entrepreneur, founder, venture partner now. He's pretty much had every role in the C-suite, and of course earlier in his career. So I think he'll be really valuable. Myself, my name is Rob Israk. I'm CMO for Topology. I run marketing and alliances and have been here for about 5 years. I was at NetSuite prior for about 8 years, QuickBooks before that, and GE before that. So I've been around as well. Let's just, before we jump right into the panel, I'll kind of give a little bit of an overview of the situation and kind of set the scape a little bit. I don't think this will be anything new to you. But of course, we're in a challenging time right now. There's a rapid deceleration in the economy, a lot of uncertainty. Some spaces are doing well, but some spaces aren't doing as well. And essentially all businesses, both preparing for now as well as long-term, have to start really rethinking how they're operating to make sure they're surviving and then they're thriving. And they come out of the end of this in 2021 and beyond and are in better shape. So rethinking pricing, payables, sales, operations, HR, cybersecurity, of course, and essentially all parts of their business. This is the moment to really start rethinking of how you operate and taking action, not settling for the status quo. Some topics I think we'll touch on today, but that you should be thinking about. Of course, protecting your employees' health. Ideally, keeping those employees as well in your business as much as possible, or at least the highest value, most important folks you can possibly keep on board. Certainly improving efficiency and productivity is critical to running your business. Of course, stabilizing your business and making sure you're balancing the risk and the rewards, both short-term and long-term. Working capital, both what you have on hand from a cash flow perspective is critical, but also long-term in terms of funding of your business and different equity and debt financing plays. And of course, preparing for long-term. So hopefully you're one of the companies that come out the back end of this and you gain market share, which I've seen happen in my previous roles at NetSuite, for example, where we ended up benefiting from the Great Recession when we came out the back door of it. So I think that sets the scape a little bit. And so without further ado, I'm going to jump right into questions with Dick.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
So
thanks for having me. Appreciate the time.
Thanks, Dick. Really appreciate you kind of carving out the time to make this happen. I don't think I'll go through all of his resume here, but right now, Dick is managing partner 01 Advisors. Obviously, his role at Twitter was a pretty long run as a CEO, but he's had a number of other roles as founder, CEO, with some nice exits along the way, COO, etc. And we'll get into this a little bit, but had some stints at Improv Comedy and consultant and some cameos on Silicon Valley, as many of us all know. But I mean, essentially, if you look at those honors and awards, he's one of the most successful CEOs over the past decade. So we're pretty lucky to have some time with him today.
Well, thanks. That's very kind of you. I'm happy to do it.
Hopefully I didn't make you blush too much there, Dick. So let's start with some more kind of questions. In terms of, you spent a lot of your career, Dick, running companies of various sizes and industries. How's it been transitioning to the VC world?
It's easy, frankly. There aren't a lot of operators who have scaled multi-billion-dollar companies who then go and become VCs. There are lots of entrepreneurs who become VCs, but not too many who are operators of these large multinational companies who then go become investors. So the advantage for Adam Bain was my CRO at Twitter and I is that when you've got that you're building and you're trying to really scale it and build a global company, we're one of the few people out there that's gone through that. There are lots of people who can take you through the early stages, and there aren't too many who have operated at scale who can take you through the later stages. So Adam and I are, seeing a lot of great deals. There's nothing more fun than just getting to help people and be helpful to a large number of people and see the different kinds of businesses they're building. One of the great lessons learned from being on the investing side is just observing how many different ways there are to be successful. I think people tend to have a success bias from whatever works for them, and then they go to a next company and, we have to do X, Y, Z because that's what worked in my last company. When you're an investor, you really realize there are all sorts of personality types, all sorts of leadership styles, all sorts of approaches to strategy and go-to-market. There are just lots of different ways to be successful, and it's interesting to sort of observe all of that. Some of which are very counterintuitive to a style that you might have thought worked for you at a company.
Cool. Could you explain, what makes 01 Advisor a little different, a little bit about your vision, and kind of what's your unique place in the world?
Yeah, we really modeled ourselves after Bill Campbell, who was my and Adam's coach at Twitter. For those of you who don't know Bill was sort of famously on the board of Apple and a close friend of Steve Jobs, and then was Larry, Sergey, and Eric's coach at Google. In fact, they've just written a book about him called $1 Trillion Coach. He was also my coach and Adam's coach at Twitter. And we really tried to adopt Bill's style. And that style is we don't take board seats. Bill's position and our position is if we're on the board, we're not going to be as close to the CEO as we want to be. One of the things that Adam and I will do is we'll go sit in the back of the room in leadership meetings, like the Monday management team meeting, for example. Just sit in the back of the room and take notes and after the meeting, sit down with the CEO and the CFO and whoever else and run through maybe how that meeting could be more effective, or look, this meeting works this way at 200 people, but when you're 1,000 people, it's not going to work. You need to be thinking about these kinds of things. And the reason for that is, look, if I'm on the board, lots of investors love to have board seats. If I'm on the board, the CEO is not going to want a board member sitting in the money management team. If I'm not on the board, it's much easier for me to be sort of sitting next to the CEO instead of sitting across from them and being more up to speed on what's going on in the company. So we actually never take board seats as opposed to insisting on taking board seats. And we spend our time much more involved in helping the CEO scale the business than, doing things like being on the comp committee or the audit committee of the board and so forth.
That makes sense. I suppose also your advice might be a little bit more grounded in that both you and Adam have been practitioners as well.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple examples. You see, and none of this is rocket science, but until you've been through it on your own, and and you have 4,000 people working for you and offices all around the world, and you're a public company, if you've never seen it, you don't know what to expect, and you don't necessarily deal with it in the most efficient way. And those examples include, one of the things we'll see is as companies start to scale beyond that sort of 100-person mark, 200 people mark, something will go wrong in the company. There'll be some problem in the company. And, I always tell CEOs, it's not the job of leadership to prevent mistakes from happening. It's the job of leadership to correct mistakes quickly when they happen. You don't want people running around afraid of taking risks and causing some problem because they might get punished for it. So, you're in a Monday meeting and you're going around the room and someone in the room says, well, we have this big problem with, customer X. And the CEO, says, well, gosh, we got to make sure that never happens again. And what the immediate tendency will be to try to, how do we make sure that never happens again? Well, we need a process to make sure X, Y, Z happens whenever a customer goes through this phase. And my comment to leaders of companies is, you don't want to be solving lots of problems with process, because pretty soon you're the TSA and you're making sure that people are taking their shoes off and not bringing water on the plane instead of managing to the outcome of there's not a bomb on the plane. You always want to be managing the outcomes instead of managing the processes. And to deal with that is to solve problems with ownership and operating structures and organizational structures. So when there's an issue, making sure that there's a single owner of it, and that owner is responsible for creating solutions and make sure those kinds of things, are bubbled up quickly to them when they happen, so that they can go and be addressed. You don't want to put processes in place to make sure that X, Y, Z never happens again, because A, X, Y, Z probably never is going to happen again from some other issue, and B, now everything is slowed down and you're just reacting as an organization much more slowly. So that's one example of many, but until you've gone through that, your sort of obvious physical reaction is to go, oh, let's make sure that never happens again and put a process in place to prevent.
Got it. Makes sense. Can you touch on your portfolio and investment strategy, some of the companies that you have invested in, and some of the thought processes on why you bet on them?
Yeah, I'll speak generally to it. Obviously, we're an investor in Topology. Generally speaking, what I'll say is we look for opportunities where the market is huge. You may find interesting companies where the total addressable market is middling, and you kind of think, well, look, even if this is really successful, it's not going to be an outsized outcome. So, we have to really thread the needle, and the execution has to be perfect to get to a sort of middling outcome. So why bother? So we look for companies where the total addressable market they're going after is massive. And then we only have really one other criteria, that the leadership team is self-aware. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that, Adam and I feel like the one thing we are really good at is mitigating execution risk. Just gave you an example of where we go into companies and help out with that. Lots of others, helping with go-to-market approaches globally, helping with scaling organizations globally as you open your second, third, fourth office, as you open your first office in Asia Pacific, as you open your first office in Europe, going public, going through that whole process. So that's where Adam and I feel like we can be really, really helpful. If the CEO and the leadership team aren't active listeners and they're not self-aware, they don't realize that they don't have all the answers, we're not going to be able to be as helpful as we otherwise would be. So we really sort of interview for and test for that sort of character from the leadership team and the CEO when we're looking to make investments. And if we don't feel like the leadership team is aware about who they are and what they know and what they don't know, and that they're not the smartest people in the room all the time, and then we just, we move on. There are plenty of other things to do. I think Adam and I both were leaders that, acknowledged the mistakes that we made when we were running Twitter and helped the team understand that, if you acknowledge the mistakes that you make to the team's going to feel a lot more comfortable acknowledging when they make mistakes. And again, you want to correct mistakes as quickly as possible when you're a leader, so you want to make sure people are telling you the truth and telling you when something's screwed up. And that's exactly what we look for in the CEO's leadership team to be investing.
Great. Just before we jump into some of the meat and potato questions, you have an interesting background that you have been an improv comedian over time. You've been a consultant and had some cameos on the Silicon Valley show we all know, and then you worked for President Obama for a little while on his national security telecom committee. Could you just touch on how you got into those different experiences and what the experiences themselves were like?
Yeah, of course. So when I graduated from the University of Michigan, to make a long story from a long time ago short, I just decided that I had a computer science degree, but I decided I didn't want to go into computer science. I wanted to try to get on Saturday Night Live. So I went to Second City, to the famous improvisational comedy shop in Chicago, and worked to get into Second City. Amazingly, I sort of showed up there the same day as Steve Carell. So Steve and I were in the very same start group, if you will, at Second City, along with
amazing.
A number of other people. I ended up performing there for a number of years and at a couple other places around Chicago. And, I was good friends with a bunch of people who, everyone would recognize. Adam McKay and Rachel Dratch from SNL and, knew Tina Fey a little bit. And all the executives, people like Amy Poehler and so forth. Those people were all sort of buddies of ours and ran around together. So that was a great time and a great experience. It was actually super helpful in developing my skills as a leader, because when you're in, and this is sort of a good segue to the coronavirus world we're in. When you're improvising on stage, if you have a preconceived notion about what should happen next in the scene, and you're not actively listening to what's going on right now, the scene's not going to be as great. The people who are the best improvisers, Tina Fey and Steve Carell, right up there at the very top of the list among them, are great listeners. They listen to exactly what's going on. They sort of clear their mind of any preconceived notions of what should happen next, and they react and deal with whatever has just been said on stage instead of whatever they've wanted to say next. And those end up being the greatest scenes, and those end up being the great comedians. And I think the same is true for leadership. I used to tell my managers and leaders at Twitter, listening is 75% of what leaders should be doing. Because if you don't listen, you can't communicate. And if you don't listen and you make some decision, you're not going to be able to understand the context for which your employees and team thought about the decision that was being made. And you can always tell in a company when a particular functional leader makes some decision and communicates it, and they hadn't been gathering feedback or listening to their team beforehand. Because they'll make a decision, and they'll say something about it, and then there will be like 9,000 email or Slack responses about disagreement with that decision. If, on the other hand, you're making some contentious decision, and you gather a bunch of feedback and you listen to your team beforehand, then when you communicate the decision, you can say things like, look, I know a lot of people felt strongly that we should do X, Y, Z. And I listened to you, and I heard your feedback, and And in fact, there was a majority of the people thought X, Y, Z, and a minority thought we should do ABC. But at the end of the day, I decided to do ABC for these reasons, and we just need to rally around that and get moving. If people feel like they were heard and you understood them and understood their reasons for feeling some way, even if you make a decision that's contrary to that, they might not like it, but they'll get behind it and go along with it. If they don't feel like they've been heard, that's when you'll have this sort of uproar in Slack or email or wherever else. Oh, I'll tell you one. You asked about Silicon Valley. I'll tell you a couple interesting stories from Silicon Valley. So the great thing about being in the writer's room for Silicon Valley was there were two great things about it. One was sort of this interesting Southern California, Northern California, to generalize, dynamic. All of the writers in the writer's room in Los Angeles think it's hilarious that every company in Silicon Valley says they're changing the world. So when I first got there, they said, there's like 10 writers around the table. And keep in mind, these are like the best comedy writers ever. One of them was the executive producer of Seinfeld. One of them was Mike Judge. One of them was the head writer for 30 Rock, sort of on and on and on. And they said, can we ask you a question? Understand? Sure, you can ask me anything you want. But when we go up to Silicon Valley and interview CEOs just to try to learn about the environment for the next season, every CEO we go talk to and ask about their company looks us straight in the eye and says, well, we're here at so-and-so, we're changing the world. And then they're like, but the person on the third floor says that, and the person on the fifth floor in the same building says that. It's like, do you guys all realize that you all say that? Anyways, they just think it's hilarious that, and they're like, why is that? And I said, well, I think there's sort of sense in Silicon Valley that we're doing these, we're pursuing these noble endeavors and helping the world be a better place. And they think it's hilarious that everyone in Northern California thinks that. The second thing I'll say about the show is there are a number of things that were written into the show that were just made up in the writer's room. They were just, conceived in the writer's room and thought of as hilarious. And wouldn't it be funny if, and inevitably, every time the show was on, I would get, and the writers would all get, 10 to 12 messages, all from different companies saying, how did you find out about that thing that happened here last year, where that exact thing happened? And, so all these people would think we were ripping off something from their company, but it was the same would come in from like 14 different companies. And it was never taken from any one of those companies. It was just made up. But there are a number, of course, and I'm sure people listening know, there are lots and lots and lots of people who watch the show and think, oh my God, they know exactly what's going on inside my company.
Cool. Well, I'll skip over the National Security Task Force for a moment to get into questions, but unless you think there's anything interesting to add on that front, Dick.
I'll just say the one great thing about getting to go into those meetings in the White House, is like you're in the White House and you're just thinking to yourself, like, man, you really, 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 if you have any humility at all, you really have imposter syndrome when you're sitting in like the Roosevelt room across from the president. You're like, why am I here? You're in this, thing you've read about and heard about, and you're in this small room sitting across from the president of the United States, and you're being asked these questions, and you just feel like, man, I got to make sure I don't say anything dopey. And so it's just always sort of super nervous in that room, irrespective of who else was in there and what we were talking about. It's a really weird experience to be in that environment and try to think of it as just a normal course of everyday business.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Cool. So getting into coronavirus, and you've already kind of touched on it in many ways and given some advice. But as business leaders are navigating and dealing with the questions and the challenges, the uncertainty, what general kind of advice do you have to think of in the coming weeks, in the coming months, to kind of guide their company successfully through this?
Yeah, I'll tell you a few different thoughts. And actually, I'll back up and say, when I first took over as CEO of Twitter, and met with the board of directors, And the board said after the sort of first couple of weeks, hey, what are your couple observations after the first couple of weeks of taking over as CEO? And one of the comments I made to them is we had a lot of recurring one-time expenses. And, it's sort of funny, but my point was we continue to make assumptions about what we think is true about the business. And then when something runs contrary to that assumption, we sort of go, oh, well, there was this anomaly in February where we spent X dollars on this, but, that's not how things will normally work. And so one of the things I did was, and look, Twitter was a crazy company. Things always sort of, and this is really relevant to the world we're in now, Twitter was a company where, irrespective of what you thought was going to happen next on the platform, something else happened. Well, certainly it won't be used for this. It's more used for this kind of communication. And then, the Arab Spring happens, and Twitter is used to organize protests sweeping across North Africa that nobody ever anticipated. All those kinds of things constantly happen. So I started to think to myself, who are the kinds of leaders who are in spaces where things don't ever go as planned? And I came up with the idea to track down and meet this guy who worked in the Pentagon, who had formerly been one of the commanding officers of a squadron on SEAL Team 6. Because I thought, this is great, whatever the old military, there's this old military cliche, everyone's got a plan until the shooting starts. It's not dissimilar to Mike Tyson's, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Anyway, I just thought, this guy will have great advice on this particular topic. And he did. And his advice was, when you obviously have to make some plan, but going in, the facts on the ground and the facts as we execute on this plan are going to change. So every time they would run a mission, afterward they would say, what could we have learned before going into that mission that we should have learned from prior experience, and how could we learn that faster? And I started using that at Twitter in my leadership team meetings, and I think that's super, super relevant to what's going on now. Because a couple of things we can be sure about are, look, nobody knows what exactly is going to happen and how things are going to change. What we do know is that things will continue to change in the next few months as new statistics emerge, people start to go back to work, maybe there's a second wave, and those things that will change will not be things that we could have predicted ever, even if we had done a bunch of scenario planning. I mean, there's already interesting consumer experiences like that. Like going into this, people were like, aha, you should, stock up on toilet paper and blah, 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 because, that will be hard to find. And in week 2, that was exactly what happened. Here we are in week 8, and toilet paper is plentiful and everywhere, but nobody can find flour, because who would have predicted everybody is now baking, decided to become a baker during this pandemic, and you can't get flour anywhere. Nobody would have predicted that. So one of the things we did at Twitter to deal with this, okay, we're not going to be able to predict what's going to happen, so how can we learn as quickly as possible, is during management team meetings, we would just look at financial data and user data and look for blind spots. And never assume, that thing happened in March because, people stopped spending on advertising at the end of the month because of coronavirus. But always, what do we need to look at in more detail here? Because it might be something we could learn from, and how could we learn that more quickly? And what I mean by that is just, I think that teams are going to constantly need to be looking at the data over the next few months and never making assumptions about, this is how the behavior of our customers started to change when we went into quarantine at the end of March, so that's the new way we should deal with it. Just think it's going to continue to change in ways you can't expect. So finance people particularly should be looking for anomalies in the data and ask themselves, what can we learn from that, and how can we learn that as quickly as possible, and do that repeatedly every week as part of a management team meeting. I mean, I even had this as a half-hour segment in my weekly management team meeting blind spots. And we would go through the data and ask ourselves, if there's something going on here, it's not an anomaly, but something we could learn from. I think that's going to be super important over the course of a couple of quarters for all business leaders.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. Adaptability, analytics, visibility. Having said that we can't predict the future and that it's going to change constantly beyond our current understanding today, from a VC perspective and when you're working with your portfolio companies and just your sense of talking with your peers and the such, which segments do you think are going to be affected most and which ones the least? How can they plan for that? And when I say segments, it could be everything from employee size to industry to other kind of spaces and the such that you guys have thought about.
Yeah, so it's interesting because, let me see. I'll just answer the question first and I'll give some color on it. Obviously, the hospitality industry is drastically affected. Restaurants, hotels, etc. Although, surprisingly, I'm just seeing this from some data that's being scraped off of the web around Airbnb. Airbnb is seeing a real uptick in the last just couple of weeks in business, which is surprising to me. And then again, one of those who would have thought you would see an almost return to normal in Airbnb that quickly. I would have never predicted that. But that whole industry is going to change dramatically. I can't imagine that. I'm working with some small businesses in New York and San Francisco on the restaurant side, and most of them are working on the assumption that 60 to 75% of all the restaurants in New York and San Francisco will not come back, which is a remarkable number. There are 4,000 restaurants in San Francisco, and people in the restaurant business are basically working on the assumption that only 1,000 to 1,500 of them are coming back. That's going to have a profound impact on the economy. Advertising businesses are obviously massively affected, and I'll point out here that one of the concerns I have is we sort of went through these Q1 earnings calls, and the market reaction was, maybe not as bad as we thought. These Q1 earnings calls are from January, February, March, and you've got sort of maybe 15 days of March in there that impacted Q1. The Q2 earnings call and be markedly worse across the board. And then you have this massive whipsaw cost cutting and when the stock get hammered and so forth and budget cuts. So I just would be super, super cautious, as I'm sure everybody is, about assuming, things are bad, but they're not that bad, and budgets are being trimmed but not trimmed that much. I think in Q3 it's going to be significantly worse. So how do you plan for that? One of the things that I encourage all our CEOs to do, I always tell our CEOs, and this is sort of going to sound trite, but you'd be surprised how often it happens, is the leading cause of failure is running out of money. Just be constantly think, that's great, you got your, SVB loan secured. Raise money now if you can raise money now. It's going to be a lot harder to raise money in Q3 and maybe even Q4. Be cultivating relationships with people who could be financing the company and thinking about, just again, padding the balance sheet. The second thing I would do is, irrespective of whether you're hiring now or not, being aggressive about hiring now or not, I would have a contingency P&L forecast in place for cutting OpEx 25% across the board and be ready to implement that at a moment's notice. And then, importantly, you have to constantly communicate to your team and the employees of the company who are super stressed out right now, and, there's tons of uncertainty, which creates anxiety, which creates stress, and be forthright about, look, Q1 looks great, Q2 looks okay, we don't have any idea what's going to happen in Q3, we need to constantly be paying attention to these numbers, and I can't promise you that, we're going to we're going to be able to operate the company the same way in Q4 that we operated it in Q1. And I'm going to always be forthright with you and honest with you, and we'll let you know about those things as soon as I can when I know about them. But we just need to constantly be paying attention to these numbers and have the ability to react at a moment's notice. And so irrespective of what Q1 looked like for you and whether you think you sort of like, that we've actually got tailwinds with COVID or something, I would just have a forecast ready to go that considers 25% across the board OpEx cuts or more, and understand that the data may change in a moment's notice, and you'll need to implement that. And I wouldn't be, again, one of the things, going back to my earlier point about, what can we learn from this and how can we learn more quickly, you don't want to be in the position where you're saying, oh, that was just a one-time thing that happened last month, or it happens again in July, and you're like, yeah, that was June and July, but August is going to go back to the way it was in April. I think those kinds of behaviors are going to lead people to run out of cash, and you'll be surprised at how many companies run out of cash in Q3 and Q4 because they were behaving that way.
Great advice. Interesting. A lot to think about there. You've already touched on how business leaders should think about it. You have given some advice already on some immediate actions they should take now, but with the emphasis on now, what are there any other additional things if you were a CEO or even CFO controller that you'd be doing right now?
Yeah, I touched on this earlier, but I think it's like super important. One of the things you need to remember when you're in a leadership role, whether you're CEO or CFO or you're running FP&A, is you can see everything that's going. You kind of have a dashboard of what's going on at the company. It's super important to remember that not everybody has that. And I used to tell my managers at Twitter, make sure everybody understands what you understand. And people would ask me, like, what do you mean by that? And I would say, I mean just that. Like, you have all of this context for what's going on that other people don't have. I mean, when they don't have that in times of uncertainty, they can start to assume the worst. So you may think, for example, like, oh, look, the data tell us that everything is fine for our business right now. And I've communicated to the company that, look, everything's fine for the business right now. Don't worry about anything. But every kind of anything that happens in the company where people who don't have access to all the data might misinterpret it or might think, well, that's very weird. I wonder if I should look for another job. You just need to constantly be communicating with them about that. I'll give you sort of a stupid example, but maybe it's helpful in understanding what I mean by it. So one time at Twitter, I needed to I changed the person I had managing the mobile engineering teams. And I just moved, instead of having someone running iOS and someone running Android, I put an engineering manager in charge of running both iOS and Android just to make sure the builds were more consistent, et cetera, et cetera. And I told the person that I was putting in charge of that, who had previously been running an international engineering team, I said, hey, I'm going to announce to the company later on today that you're running mobile engineering now. So make sure you tell your international managers this morning that this announcement's going to happen so they're not surprised that you're leaving and why do you need to tell them, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the email address for Twitter International, Twitter-International at Twitter.com, was close to the same as the email to every single employee in the company, which was Twitter-Internal at Twitter.com. So this person walked into my office at like noon with this sheepish look on his face and was like, hey, I screwed up. I sent the email to the whole company instead of a Twitter International. And I just said, like, oh, well, that's okay. That's your problem. Your international people are just going to say, why didn't you tell us first? And now you've communicated to the entire company, and I don't have to do it later today. So great. Problem solved. Don't worry about it. See you later. And 2 days later, I'm walking around on the engineering floor, a mobile engineering floor, and I'm asking a couple of people how it's going. And they're like, it's okay. Everyone's pretty bummed out. I'm like, well, what? What are you talking about? And the woman who's running iOS engineering says, we just think it was weird that this guy who's now managing mobile engineering sort of took it upon himself to inform the entire company what he was now in charge of with no communication from anyone else. It just feels like this guy's like usurped this role and announced it to the company and sort of made himself king of mobile engineering, and then everyone else is silent about it. So, like, does the leadership team even know he's done this, or do you even know he's, like, in charge of what we're doing now? Did you see that email? And I realized, a quick example of what I'm talking about, when you've got individual contributors who don't have context for everything that's in the company, they can wildly differently interpret something that's happened or a data point than you would. So it's just so important during these times when there's even increased anxiety and increased uncertainty to over-communicate context for everything. And again, that was sort of an innocuous thing that happened during a time when the company was doing great. Think about data points that people see in the company today, in your companies, where there's not everything's going great and there is tons of uncertainty, and then they don't hear from leadership about it. There's going to be all sorts of vibrating, if you will, I used to call it. Like, people in the company are vibrating, and we got to, like, calm everybody down. And then the final point on that, and I'm sorry I'm going on so long about this, but the final point I'll make about that is when people in the company can see you communicating context for data point, or context for changes, or context for differences in forecasts, and they see you doing it sort of in a calm and thoughtful way with an understanding of all the uncertainty you're facing, it just creates resilience in the employees. It helps them realize, like, look, we're all going through this. I just heard, Rob say, I just heard Dick say, he understands how things are, and he understands the way we all must be feeling, and, he's going to consistently communicate context for things. So it makes the team more resilient, and when the incremental strange thing happens, they're more resilient to it than they would have been otherwise.
Got it. What trends or innovations do you see coming in the horizon? What do you think the new normal will look like in flash forward 6 or 9 months?
Yeah. So I for sure think, like, a bunch of things will change, and they won't necessarily be the things that we predicted were going to change. I do think that, and we've already seen this from Twitter yesterday, there will be a lot more questioning about office space in very, very expensive areas for technology companies that understand how to work virtually. I think, it was sort of a surprising announcement when Twitter said yesterday that going forward, most employees can work from home forever if they want to. I don't think that will be the case. I don't think they will work from home forever, but what they will do is move office location. Why have an office in one of the most expensive places in the world when you can put it in, somewhere else, Portland, for example. So I think there will be a dramatic shift in the amount of commercial real estate that particularly tech companies have in very, very high-priced areas. But we'll see. Again, I think the things that will change will be things that we couldn't have anticipated would change.
Sure.
And the predictions about what all those things will be wrong. But it will also be the case that I think I've seen a lot of other people say, look, these recessions tend to happen, and then things go back to normal a lot more quickly than you think. I don't think that this is the same thing. I think people, there have been so many changes that have happened now structurally that have reinforced you can work virtually and you can be successful virtually. And maybe we didn't need to fly everybody from New York for that meeting. That there, and with the coming impact on the economy, that I think will be a lot more lasting than people think. There will be a need to take all those things out of the budget. So those kinds of structural changes, I think, will be permanent. The travel structural changes, and we need 150 square feet of office space in San Francisco for every one of our employees.
Yeah, and there's a big mental mindset change along with that. It sounds like. Any last?
I think that the last thing I would say on that subject is I would be prepared for, going along with what I said about, sort of the economy and earnings announcements after Q2, which would be in Q3. I would be prepared for customers across the board to be looking for solutions that can save them money as the primary driver of buying decisions toward the end of this year. Like, this is now a nice to have, and it's now a must have, because maybe after immediately go into figuring out how I can take X dollars out of my budget.
Got it. Any final advice before we'll move into a very short presentation and then go back to Q&A? Any final advice until we kind of move forward to kind of share with what you're getting to your own portfolio companies and startup?
My final couple of comments are, as a leader of the company, you just have to remember that everybody is looking at you. They're looking for people. And, I was walking through the office Twitter one day, and I was like, I don't know, it was some personal thing. My daughter was freaking out about the high school she had to go to, or didn't want to go to the high school she was in. I don't even remember what it was. I'm walking through the hallways, and my fists are clenched, and my head's down because I'm thinking about this issue. And the woman who ran HR for us, Janet Van Hoyt, who's now in a Cloudflare running HR there, she comes to me and goes, "Hey, you need to understand." Everyone's freaking out. Like, why? Because you just walk through the commons with your head down and your face clenched and your hands clenched, and that's not the way you normally behave. You usually walk through there and say, "Hi, everybody," and everyone's freaking out about drastically wrong with the company. And anyway, long story short, the important point was, look, people are always looking to the leaders for signals. And so, or just, to the folks on the phone, leadership of these companies, it's just important to be reflecting an attitude of, look, it's just super uncertain, and, I can't tell you for sure what's going to happen, but, projecting an attitude of hopefulness, right? We're going to get through this. We're going to be more resilient on the other side of this, and hopeful people are more fun to be around. They create positive energy for people who are stressed around them, and they're the most likely to beneficial change in an organization. So just projecting an image of hopefulness, even if, I know you're freaking out too, it's just going to be super, super important for the rest of the people in the company.
Got it. Yeah, that's helpful advice to me too. So I'll go through some quick topology overview. I know a number of people, we've had this in the past when they've attended these events. They actually asked us to show a live demo. This time, we're not going to show a live demo. We didn't think it was appropriate. But I'll give a brief overview of topology, give our perspective on where we fit into all of this, and then we're going to go back to Q&A. So I'm actually going to kind of accelerate my speed for the topology presentation, frankly, just because we only have the opportunity to have someone like Dick on with us and helping you guys so often, and there have been a number of questions coming in, and I want to make sure I get to as many of them as I can. So without further ado, I will jump into a little overview of topology. Probably many of the folks on the phone are already familiar with us and have attended past emails or written some of our blogs or ebooks. But as briefly, we have almost 1,000 customers at this point. You can see a number of the brands. One of those brands is, of course, Twitter. Adam and Dick actually used us for many years when they were at Twitter, and we helped them through both helping them scale their global payables operation, adding efficiencies, and in particular, building a much more robust financial control framework, cost and financial control framework for tax compliance, regulatory compliance, audit proof, fraud, etc. But you can see the number of customers we have. Obviously, there's billions of dollars running through our platform, 10 billion. It's actually a little bit more than that, to be frank, running through it annually, millions of payees. We really pride ourselves, part of our DNA is customer satisfaction. We really pride ourselves with really high customer retention and customer satisfaction. Frankly, it was hard for me to move from NetSuite to any company, and that was one of the things that really got me to make the jump, because I heard real advocacy and love of the customer base and vice versa. And so that was really what made me exciting. We do focus on fast-growing companies, mid-sized companies. We do have many enterprises you can see up here. We also have many small businesses, but generally that's kind of where our focus is. And we're proud that we're one of a handful of companies in the world who've made the Deloitte 500 and 5,000 for the past 2 years running. It's a really short list. So definitely the only person in our space who've achieved that. And we expect to do it for the third year as well. I'm not going to go belabor this, but, I think as a finance team, a finance organization, you really also have to think about how you're prepared to navigate the coronavirus situation. This is an opportunity to repair broken processes, to address manual processes, to make sure there aren't things that are causing cost leakage or fraud leakage or financial risk leakage in your business, because you really have to preserve all of those pieces as possible to help with your longevity and make sure you can focus your team and the company on those investments that matter. And you can see in the upper right-hand side of the screen, those are those types of things that the finance team is being asked to more and more contribute to and help with the business from a cost-benefit analysis, really understanding CAC in the business, helping improve visibility and the such. And it's a fact through multiple surveys of controllers and CFOs, accounts payable is literally the number one most time-consuming function in finance. It's where most time is wasted across a variety of different functions in finance, not just the accounts payable or the payments folks. And it's the area that makes sense to address, because that leads to helping avoid future headcount requirements. It leads to being able to divert the current finance people to do more rewarding, strategic things that actually impact the business. And that's why we're here. I think our perspective, it aligns very much with what Dick was saying in many ways. But from a finance perspective, we think the three keys are coming into three categories. Deliver more with less. We're just not in a situation where it's going to be easy to add more headcount. And every headcount when you hire has to be really well thought through and make sure it's the right place in the business. And if it's in finance, it's the function of finance that's going to help drive the company forward, help it grow where it can, and the such. And so you have to be really thoughtful with the different functions within the finance department and those functions that are critical and a necessity to run the business, but don't help with that kind of growth orientation and innovation orientation and the such. You really, if you can automate those functions or those processes as much as possible, free those people up to do more high impact work, you should really consider that. Certainly in a global context, a global operation, that's even more important because there's a lot of complexity with that's added along with risk and inefficiencies. The smart cost and cash flow controls, look for ways. Of course, you don't want to be smart as the key word there. You want to make the right cost cut controls that don't impact your long-term negatively, but you make the right pieces that, sustain your business, free up cash in ways to invest back in the business in the right strategic areas, the place that are profitable and set you up for the future. So look at what areas can you cut costs on, what controls can you put in place to make sure every dollar spent is thought through really properly. Are you optimizing your operations? And certainly on the compliance side, make sure you're not wasting money on unnecessary tax penalties, OFAC penalties, GDPR penalties, audits, and the such. And certainly, of course, we went work from home is a short-term thing, but it's also probably going to be more and more a long-term thing. And do you have the processes in place, the technologies in place to enable productivity in that work from home scenario? And of course, you have to do it securely with the right privacy and the such, and with peace of mind for your team and for your company. A little tiny bit about Topology before we jump into Q&A. But essentially our approach, like I said, we focus on the mid-market. Mid-market companies have a lot of complexity, a lot of payments volume, a lot of risk they have to worry about, but they don't have the resources that enterprises often have. And so it's built for scale. And the way we build it is with a suite. We build it with a holistic approach, looking at all the processes that are impacted in the mass payments and accounts payable workflow, and then we address those. The reality with accounts payable, it's not an invoice widget. It's also not a payments widget. It's not even a global payments widget. You really have to address the different chevrons, if you will, of that process to make sure that one process doesn't break another. And that's what we address, from supplier management and onboarding to tax compliance, KPMG certified, OCR-based, AI-based invoice processing, including email-based approvers, PO matching, three-way PO matching, which is absolutely best in class for cost control right now. A global remittance, so not just your U.S. suppliers, but your global suppliers, not just your U.S. and global suppliers, but also your multi-subsidiary, multi-entity operation, including things like currency conversion across your different entities. Of course, early payments with our NetNow solution, so you can address your suppliers' need for cash flow without impacting your own working capital. And then, of course, from the fraud perspective, we've got fraud modules using AI, reconciliation report that's real time across all entities, across all payment methods, across all geos and all accounts. And then across the whole platform, that multi-entity setup, as well as best-in-class financial controls that are really enterprise-grade. That's why companies like Amazon and Twitter have used us. Of course, the latest cloud technology, artificial intelligence, and such. But that's how we're addressing the problems. And then really briefly, these are the results. Docker reduced their AP workload by almost 90%, while also accelerating their financial close by 25%. Touch of Modern scaled from a 6 million business to 150 without having to hire accounts payable people along the way. And you can see some other great numbers on financial controls, acceleration, and productivity at the bottom with Zola and Foursquare there as well. And without further ado, I'm going to jump into Q&A. I told you I'd try and make it short. So back to you, Dick. In terms of the first question that came in from the audience, is there something you regret investing in, both in the business world and as a VC? And how do you kind of, what are you doing differently now based on those, that learning?
Yeah. I'll say, I'll frame it this way: beware the charismatic CEO. I think, and it may sound like a joke, but you can see a pitch and see an investment pitch, and it can include all the numbers and everything. So it can just be different than the reality. And it's sometimes hard if you need to make a decision quickly on the heels of the pitch. It's pretty well. Look, I'll use WeWork as an example. I never put any money into WeWork, but look at all the some of the world's very, very best investors and the money they put to work in that company and the valuations where they put it to work. Everyone from Benchmark to on up. And when people who had never seen the pitch and never heard Adam speak a word in his life, look at the S1, they're like, "Are you kidding me? What's this thing? You can take this public?" So I think that's just something that you need to be smart about. And the way to do that, to make sure there's enough space between the pitch and your real due diligence and evaluation of the thing as an investment. Otherwise, you tend to weave the story and the charisma into your analysis, and it can be extremely faulty. So that's probably lessons 1, 2, and 3.
Great. This is an interesting one. How, as you think through the leaders you're coaching and the such, how should they think through balancing the places that are still necessary to make investments in, hiring, cash flow, automation? How should they think through those different trade-offs and conflicts right now, during this pandemic type situation?
Yeah, it's great. It is a great question. When I say 25% OPEX cuts across the board, I mean 25% OPEX cuts total. They shouldn't be 25% from each category. I think the thing I would be really, really deprioritizing is hiring. You don't want to, if you've got high priority tech investments that you don't make, that when we come out of this, and we will come out of it, we don't know whether it's 1 quarter or 10 quarters, you want to be in a position to accelerate. And if you haven't made investments that you needed to make, that were vital to make, that were critical to make, and you instead traded those investments for 4 additional hires, back in the day, you're going to be in trouble. So as I said, leading cause of failure is running out of money. I would put in priority order optimizing for cash flow, tech investments, and hiring, and prioritizing critical tech investments over what may appear to be critical hires.
Got it. This is an interesting one. So kind of a career path question. If you're in finance and you have, let's say you're a director of finance or maybe controller, and you want to get to the executive level one day, what are some of the qualities they need to be thinking of to build to help them get there? And what are some of the things they need to do as well?
The characteristics of the people in my finance organization who became executives and sometimes even moved out of the finance organization and became executives reporting to me in other roles were the people who didn't just look at the numbers and ask themselves, how can that number change from X to Y next quarter? It was the people that looked at the numbers and came to me or came to the executive team and said, here's this interesting thing that's happening. Have we thought about doing this? Or here's this interesting thing I'm seeing. I don't know if it's a trend yet, but if it happens again in April and May, we should think about doing that. Those kinds of people who exhibited an ability to look through the numbers into more strategic opportunities or M&A opportunities or business opportunities are in the best position to move into executive roles in a company. And I would add further that people in finance are in the best position to doing that. In the best position to do that. They're the ones seeing all the data points. The person who's a director of marketing or the person who's the West Coast sales manager isn't seeing that broad perspective that the people in finance are seeing. So I think that is an organization that is ripe for moving into executive roles across the organization. And in fact, a bunch of the people in my finance department are now CEOs. Amir Mogafagi is the CEO of McDonald's. He was running FP&A for me, and then I made him vice president of business operations because he saw a bunch of things in the numbers that we were able to apply strategically across the organization. Anthony Noto is and now CEO of SoFi, and on and on. I could go on about that.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Dick, I really appreciate your time. I know you went a little over, so sorry for taking some extra time, but it's really been great. I've enjoyed it. I think I've actually learned quite a bit from this myself. And I hope the audience really enjoyed it. Really appreciate your time, and hope you enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob, and everyone stay safe, and I'm happy to help. Anytime you want me to hop on, I'm happy to jump on with people. Talk to you soon.
All right, will do. I may take you up on that, but you were. I had high expectations, but you kind of blew those away. I will do for the folks who were attending. We will be sending out a recording of this in a few days, so look out for that, and feel free to share with others if you'd like. And definitely, of course, as always, let us know your feedback, and that way we can kind of address other needs of yours in the future and come up with good webinars and formats to help you keep learning and getting the most out of the Topology community. So thanks for everyone. Thanks especially to Dick, and have a great day and stay safe out there.